Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I want to look at the weekend of May the 30th and 31st, 2026. This weekend, there is a full moon in Sagittarius. This is an important event, and this full moon is likely to have an impact on all the 12 signs. So the main part of this video will be me just going through the 12 signs, and I'll be talking about a number of different things in my descriptions, but the full moon is going to certainly play a big role. I'm making this recording, by the way, on a Friday, the 29th, so okay, it's not quite my birthday, but my birthday is on Saturday. So as far as this video is concerned, it is for my birthday weekend, and I am going to be 64 years old. I mean, 64 is kind of an interesting number because it is 8 times 8. Of course, it also relates to the Beatles song, you know, will you still love me, whatever, when I'm 64, all that kind of stuff. So I've finally hit that 64. And, 8 times 8, Venus repeats itself every 8 years, I think. Every 8 years, Venus returns to where it was at the start point. So there is that eight-year Venus cycle. And so you've got 8 times 8. So you could say you've got 8 Venus cycles with this 64 years. I was going to talk about my horoscope in this video, but the trouble is, it's got this full moon to talk about, and I think this full moon really is relevant. So anyway, let's look at the astrology for the weekend. So here is the chart for the weekend, set for midnight on May the 31st, New York time. So, that midnight time, that represents, the middle of the weekend. And at the middle of the weekend, we have the moon in Sagittarius. So, yeah, it is a moon in Sagittarius weekend. The moon goes into Sagittarius, I think, at 1:45 in the afternoon on Saturday. So if you're in the Americas, basically the whole weekend is going to have the moon in Sagittarius. If you're in Europe or Africa, then Saturday morning, maybe early Saturday afternoon, the moon will be in Scorpio, then it goes into Sagittarius. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then really Saturday Saturday sees the moon in Scorpio, Sunday the moon in Sagittarius. So we just had the moon in Scorpio, and so the moon moving into Sagittarius, that's that is a big change. Moon in Sagittarius is sort of maybe more optimistic than the moon in Scorpio. Scorpio, the moon is fallen. It's a bit too emotional, a bit brooding. But now that the moon is in Sagittarius, it's quite an expansive place to the moon. The moon is in a fire sign. It's in general sort of more exciting. And so this moon, when it does move into Sagittarius, it makes an opposition to Uranus, and then it moves on and it makes a trine to Neptune, and it makes a sextile to Pluto. So we get sort of a blast of energy. That Moon Uranus opposition on Saturday, could be quite interesting. It's just a reminder that Uranus is in Gemini. Uranus is emphasized by the moon being opposition it. So that might create a sort of action on Saturday. Perhaps things happening that we hadn't foreseen. And it's important that we don't panic if someone does something we weren't expecting, or perhaps says something, or it just could be just some random event, or it just could be nothing. I mean, nothing physical. But Moon and Sagittarius can also be about some kind of realization. And additionally, we have some fixed star activity. The sun is on Aldebaran. So Aldebaran, of course, the sun will always be on Aldebaran at this time of year. So the Aldebaran is, I would have said, quite an important fixed star. So let me see what Robson says. So this is Vivian Robson, the fixed stars in their constellation. So he says, it is, an important point about Aldebaran. It is one of the royal stars, because the Persians had these 4 royal stars representing the sort of the direction. So Aldebaran is a major star, and it's the watcher of the east. And as far as what it's about, according to Robson, it can be about honor, intelligence, eloquence, steadfastness, integrity, popularity, courage, ferocity. I mean, it's quite an angry star. Maybe Aldebaran really wants to stand up for what it believes in. And when it's conjunct the sun, Robson says, great energy and perseverance, high material honours, but danger of losing them, danger from quarrels and the law, honour and riches ending in disgrace and ruin, liable to disease, fevers, and a violent death. So there are kind of 2 sides to Aldebaran. It's certainly quite brave, stands up for what it believes in, but it's kind of ferocious, and it might sort of attract bad luck, maybe. But the kind of bad luck that we would kind of bring on ourselves by taking something too far. So the Aldebaran influence may be particularly felt by the fact that we have got a full moon over the weekend. And additionally, we've got the beginning of a weekend. We've got Sun semi-square Jupiter. So there's the Sun and there's Jupiter. So they are sort of 45 degrees apart. So with Sun semi-square Jupiter, Sun conjunct Aldebaran semi-square Jupiter, there is just a possibility that someone takes something too far. It may not be us as individuals. It could be something just going on in the world which is about exaggeration, and it could be extreme exaggeration. Now, I will be talking about the full moon in a moment, but I just wanted to just quickly look at the positions of the planets in terms of Australia and New Zealand, and also the heliocentric picture. I won't be long. So here is the positions of planets if we set things for Sydney, Australia. So if you set things for Sydney, Australia, then at the middle of a weekend, sort of around sort of midnight on Sunday, the moon is at 0 degrees Sagittarius. And that just tells us that, as I've just said, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, East Asia, then the whole of Saturday, the moon is in Scorpio, and Sunday, the moon is in Sagittarius. So your experience of a weekend could actually be quite different from someone who is in the Americas, with all of that it's Scorpio energy. So that is the main difference, and you get that blast of Sagittarius. Well, that all happens on Sunday. And turning to the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. So the Earth is at 9-10 degrees Sagittarius. It's making a square to Venus. So Earth square Venus. I mean, it's quite Venusian. The Venus energy is very clear. But the question is, how exactly do we experience it? It might be that, certain relationships are a little bit strained because, Earth is making a square to Venus. This is also taking at the same time as this geocentric full moon. So I think we're really quite aware of, the differences between, ourselves and others. It's not all about oneness and sameness. And additionally, we've got Jupiter is now making an exact sextile to Uranus. It is exact. You can see Jupiter is at 1 degree 37 Leo, and Uranus is at 1 degree 37 Gemini. So Uranus and Jupiter exactly sextile. Like I was saying yesterday, with Jupiter and Uranus, they can be together, this pair, about some kind of relief. Reinhold Ebertin calls it the thank the Lord aspect, because things are suddenly working, or rather, we've had a problem and suddenly the problem gets resolved in quite a sort of a dramatic way, and that may be how we feel about what's going on in the world. People trying to sort out, maybe there's hope about peace treaties and so forth. But Jupiter and Uranus, this sextile, maybe it has a different manifestation. I mean, it's quite a violent pairing, Jupiter and Uranus as well. I mean, it is about doing things that are quite dramatic, wanting action, feeling that action is quite important. And so there may be another dimension to it, and we should look at Mercury. You see, Mercury is making a semi-sextile to Jupiter, heliocentric semi-sextile. It's also making a square to Uranus. So that Mercury square Uranus, in fact, the fact that you've got all these planets at 1, and that's what you should often look at in a heliocentric chart. Are there these sort of 12th harmonic aspects, the 12th harmonic series, conjunctions, oppositions, squares, trines, semi-sextiles, quincunxes, they're all part of that 12th harmonic aspect. In fact, I can just show you the 12th harmonic of that chart. So if we look at the 12th harmonic of the heliocentric chart, we should see Mercury, Jupiter, and Uranus all together. There we are. You can see on the 12th harmonic, Mercury, Jupiter, and Uranus are really coming together, and that may suggest that it's quite an interesting weekend, quite a verbal weekend, but it could be quite a tense weekend. People are wanting action. There is this nervous energy, underpinning events taking place over the weekend, and that may say something about us on a personal level, but it just might also say something about just events and how people are responding to events, particularly people who have power. And now I want to switch to the full moon. So here's the full moon, and it takes place on May the 31st at 9:45 a.m. So that's a Sunday. So this full moon, how do we judge this full moon? So first of all, this full moon is in Sagittarius. So we've got moon at 9:56 Sagittarius, sun at 9:56 Gemini. So if you've got a full moon, in general, as I always say, it's about the truth. It's about seeing things for what they are. The gloss gets stripped away. We can have all sorts of fantasies and delusions, and the full moon, we see things as they are, and particularly perhaps with a Sagittarius full moon. Sagittarius is a sign that is about the truth. Some of the words that one uses with Sagittarius are, blunt, tactless. And so it may be a time to be blunt and tactless. You tell people what we feel, and they can tell us what they feel. And it could be a rude awakening with the full moon. And whether or not that's a good or a bad thing perhaps depends on how we respond to the situation. It also is about motives. Why would you want to be rude to someone? Why would you want to be blunt and tactless? Well, hopefully one is doing it just out of just sheer honesty. The truth is always better. It's always better to know. But if we're in a position where we are telling someone the truth, maybe we need to ever so slightly sugarcoat the pill. I mean, we don't want to sugarcoat. I mean, I'm thinking about sugarcoating. It's interesting with sugarcoating. Yeah, well, pills always used to be sugar-coated. Have they stopped sugar-coating pills? Because when I think about pills, they're never sugar-coated nowadays. They're always just this tablet, powdered, powder with there's no sugar-coating anymore. Is that something that's changed in the pharmaceutical industry? Just an observation there, but there is this question about how far we do sugarcoat our message. I mean, if we sugarcoat the message too much, then people don't understand. And because the truth is available doesn't mean that we are necessarily going to respond to it. We might just be in denial. So that might be a good reason why, if we want someone to understand something, we maybe have to use quite sort of blunt language. And this full moon is tied up with Uranus. You can see that it's the sun is conjunct Uranus, the moon is opposition Uranus. So there is a feeling of shock value with this full moon. Things happening that we weren't expecting, perhaps things being said to us that we weren't expecting. So it is quite a nervous full moon, and additionally, it's tied up with two sort of fixed stars. I've just talked about Aldebaran, and so Aldebaran is quite a difficult star. It might be an honourable star, but it's quite sort of accident prone. And the moon is conjunct Antares. So Antares is is a star at around sort of 9 degrees, 10 degrees Sagittarius, and it's another of those royal stars, the Persian royal star, and Antares, kind of has a sort of a similar feel to Aldebaran. Okay, if you're a fixed stars expert, you might regard that as being a bit of a generalization, but Robson says of Antares, it causes malevolence, destructiveness, liberality, broad-mindedness, evil presages, and danger of fatality, and makes its natives rash, ravenous, headstrong, and destructive to themselves by their own obstinacy. And the moon conjunct Antares, according to Robson, is popular, broad-minded, interested in philosophy, science, and metaphysics, liable to change religious opinions, influential friends, but what else? Favourable for business and domestic matters, active in local affairs, but benefits may not prove lasting, danger of violence, sickness, drowning, or assassination. So it's a potentially difficult star, but it can be successful. I think both these stars can be successful, but this full moon connected these to both Aldebaran and Antares. Perhaps that's a reason why it is a dramatic full moon. I mean, it is a reason. So I don't think that this full moon should be trivialized at all. I think it could be something quite important. Now, in terms of the thumbnail of this video, I was a bit sort of melodramatic, picture of Zeus and lightning and whatever. So where's the link here? Well, the thing about this full moon is that it's not just linked with Uranus. It's linked with Jupiter. So there's a moon at 9 degrees Sagittarius, and it's making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter, and it's making a semi, and the sun is making a semi. Moon is making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. Sun is making a semi-square to Jupiter. So there is a Jupiter feel to this full moon. In fact, at the time of this full moon, Jupiter is on the Sun-Moon midpoint. I'll be looking at the 90-degree dial in a moment, and so you could say that there is actually something quite fortunate about the full moon. because of that Jupiter influence. And I think that's particularly the case on a personal level. We have choice. Politicians, countries don't have so much choice. And so if there's something we want to do of value and we are enthusiastic and open-minded, this full moon could be great. But, Jupiter can be excessive. It can take things too far. And, Jupiter may have a different manifestation because, in the Uranian scheme of planets, there are hypothetical planets. In the Uranian school of astrology, there are 8 hypothetical planets. And one of those hypothetical planets is Zeus. You can see Zeus is one of the glyphs on the thumbnail. And so just let me show you Zeus. So let me just turn on the hypotheticals. I know it makes for a very crowded chart, but can't be helped. So there's Zeus. Where's Zeus gone? Here's Zeus. It's kind of an up-pointing arrow with a cross, an X cross or an X at the bottom. And Zeus is currently at 24 degrees 59 Libra retrograde. And the moon is at 9 degrees 56 Sagittarius. In other words, Zeus is semi-square the moon with a 3 arc-minute orb. In other words, Zeus is exactly semi-square the moon. Likewise, Zeus is exactly sesquiquadrate the moon. Again, with a 4 arc-minute orb. Is that right? Yeah, this is the time of a full moon. So I mean, the orb will of course be exactly the same. I don't know. So it's is that right? 3 arc-minutes. It's 3 arc-minute orb. So this full moon is very, very coloured by this planet Zeus. It's a hypothetical planet. Now you might be thinking that it's a hypothetical planet. Alfred Witte and his colleagues, when they created the system, they sort of reverse engineered events to come up with Zeus, and you may think that that's just nonsense. Well, in my experience, the hypothetical planets do work. And I think that we need to really think very carefully about what Zeus is about, because I think this Zeus is going to very much colour this full moon. And, Zeus is kind of similar to Jupiter. It's perhaps more the side of Jupiter that sort of acts quickly and unexpectedly. Jupiter just suddenly sort of appears. There's a sort of a surprise to Jupiter. And Alfred Witte, he associated Zeus with action, but he also saw a negative side to Zeus, for example, in terms of assassinations, gunshots, violence, explosions, and so it's not necessarily a particularly easy energy, Zeus. And so when you think about it, this full moon, it's linked with Jupiter by semi-square and sesquiquadrate. It's also linked to Zeus by semi-square and sesquiquadrate. And so, so Zeus is actually pretty close to a square of Jupiter, just over a degree. Now, when I'm using a hypothetical planet, I try to use really tight orbs. I try to just only use sort of one degree orb. But the point is that there is a kind of a symmetry here. You can see that there's the full moon, and you've got Jupiter. There's Jupiter making the 45-degree aspect to the Sun. Then you've got Zeus making a 45-degree aspect to the Moon, and so I think that is really, really very powerful. And so having both Zeus and Jupiter on the Sun-Moon midpoint really does indicate that there could be something really quite over the top about this full moon that is not immediately obvious, and this is why one does need to use semi-squares and sesquiquadrates. So something, something quite violent. I think it is a violent full moon. I mean, I think it is a full moon also of opportunity, of successful action. So, if we want to do something over the weekend and into next week, I think we can. But we do have to be a bit careful. I mean, things could, get out of control very, very easily. And if we look at this full moon in terms of the 90-degree dial, we do get further information. So let's look at the 90-degree dial. So because it's a full moon, it's shown as a conjunction on the 90-degree dial. So there it is. And so we can start to see some of the midpoints that the full moon manifests. You can see, there is that Jupiter-Uranus square. Sorry, Jupiter-Zeus square. So they are together. So a semi-square and a sesquiquadrate will be shown as an opposition. So Zeus semi-square sesquiquadrate the moon, there it is. There's Jupiter semi-square sesquiquadrate the sun moon. And then we're interested in what midpoints are shared by the sun, moon, Jupiter and Zeus. Well, there is one midpoint I'm very concerned about, and that is the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So Mars-Saturn midpoint, it's not exact, but I think it's 40. I think this says 48 degrees, 48 arc minutes. So so there is Saturn, there is Mars. So you can see Zeus, Jupiter, Sun, Moon are all on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and the Mars-Saturn midpoint, as I always say, is about frustration. It's about things not happening, getting very frustrated when they're not happening, and at worst, the Mars-Saturn pairing, can be about death and destruction. I mean, that is certainly a way of looking at it. And so, as far as what Witter in his Rules of Planetary Pictures says about the Mars. The Mars-Saturn midpoint. So, he sees the Mars-Saturn midpoint, he sees it as being periodic work, interruption of work. There is the frustration of Mars and Saturn, sickness, acute sickness or matters, acute matters, that's what he means, interruption, act of separation, forced separation, and at worst, death. And he says of Zeus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, he says quarrels and grave enmities, which in most cases are never forgotten. Death through firearms, fire, assassination. That is somewhat grim. I mean, Sun on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Remember, this full moon is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Death, sickness, personal difficulties. Moon on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Disappointing changes where work is concerned. Sickness or death of female persons. Death among the people, or death of people of public interest. The hour of death. So there really is something grim about this full moon. And so, trying to think about what this might mean. Obvious point is exaggeration, melodrama, and hyperbole. That is the problem. I do this all the time. I look at something like a full moon, and I look at it theoretically, and I come up with all the reasons why it might be completely disastrous, and as it happens, it's nothing. There's always bad things going on in the world, Iran, Ukraine, whatever. And is this weekend going to be any different? I mean, it might not be, but I'm looking at it from a theoretical point of view. I am pointing out that the picture does look rather difficult. Will it manifest? I don't know. it might not manifest. But perhaps my job as an astrologer is to look at things from the worst case scenario. That perhaps says something about me. I don't really like to look at things from a best case scenario. Well, I could. I mean, from a best case scenario, I think it is a time of action. But, with all of this Jupiter and Zeus, exaggerated behavior, things happening that are unexpected, explosions, gunshots, just a feeling of frustration that things are just not moving. I mean, it could work on a psychological level. We want action. We really want action. We want to, break through and create something. But is it really happening? And it might not be. And so there is this just general feeling of frustration, and of course, if we feel that there's frustration, when someone else feels frustrated and they want something to happen, so they try to push something forward, and so you can imagine how decision makers are going to be impacted by this full moon. It's not going to be easy, and I wanted to just look at some examples of Sun and Moon making semi-squares to Zeus. So you can look at examples of events taking place when the Sun was semi-square or sesquiquadrate Zeus, and I'm talking about exact. 15 arc minutes. No further. No more than that. I want to make it really, really exact. And also the Moon. So because now we've got the Sun and the Moon. Semi-square sesquiquadrate Zeus. So maybe these events, and perhaps these people as well, will give us some idea about perhaps what to expect. So examples would be the French surrender. So France surrendered to Germany on June the 22nd, 1940, the infamous scene in the railway carriage. And this took place with the Sun at... This is the Moon. So here's the Moon, and sorry, let me get this. I'm confused. If that's right, let's start again. There is a Sun at There's a Sun at 1 degree 4 Cancer. There is Zeus at 15 degrees 58 Leo. So the Sun and Zeus were exactly 45 degrees apart. And so this perhaps gives you an idea about how Zeus can work, that there is a military element to Zeus. The power of Zeus was really strong. And in this case, we were dealing with, a surrender. So it's, not necessarily, anything fortunate. And we get that military feel. And another event was the assassination of Indira Gandhi. You can see there was an assassination theme when we talked about Zeus. And so Indira Gandhi, she was the Indian Prime Minister, and on October the 31st, 1984, she was assassinated. I certainly remember her assassination. I was in a hotel room in Kathmandu, and when I heard it on the radio. And the next day I had to fly into India, so it was really quite dramatic. It was really, for me, one of the most dramatic days in my life, actually being part of a world, seeing a world event, seeing a country that was devastated by the assassination of its leader. And so Indira Gandhi had this Sikh bodyguard, and they just turned on her, and they shot her. And they were upset about the storming of the Golden Temple, so the Sikh issues and relating to the Punjab and so forth, were a really big deal at the time. And so when she was assassinated, the Sun was at 7 degrees 55 Scorpio, and Zeus was at 22 degrees 56 Virgo. So the Sun and the Sun and Zeus were exactly 45 degrees apart when Indira Gandhi was assassinated. And another event that had a Zeus feel to it took place in 2014. So here we have, let me get this right. So Zeus, where's Zeus gone? So I've got so many planets here, I just find it difficult to find them all. So there is Zeus at 16 degrees Libra, 1629 Libra. There's the Sun at 1 degree 33 Pisces. So there was an exact Sun-Zeus sesquiquadrate at the time. So again, Sun-Zeus thing. And it was about a lot of people being killed by snipers. So in Ukraine. So the situation was that there had just been a coup in Ukraine. So the elected government had just been overthrown, but it was a sort of US-backed coup. I mean, I think a lot of the events going on in Ukraine are a result of this coup. And on February the 20th, there were some demonstrators, and there were snipers shooting these. I mean, I don't know the full details, but these snipers were shooting at these demonstrators. And there was this question mark: who were the snipers? Who actually was doing it? I mean, you can look it up. I mean, I don't want to try to attempt to describe it because it's quite complex. But you get this idea with Sun sesquiquadrate Zeus. It is to do with shootings, can be to do with shootings. We saw with the assassination of Indira Gandhi, and there is this sort of unexpected feel to it. And this is why perhaps with this full moon with this full moon aspecting Zeus, that it really can be difficult, and so it's something that we should be aware of. And if we're talking about Ukraine, one of the results of the coup taking place was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. People see Russia's invasion of Ukraine as some sort of random event. One sunny day, Putin decided to invade Russia. It was part of a long process which all started with the Maidan coup. And so here is the chart for Russia's invasion, which took place on February the 24th, 2022. And the moon was at 7 degrees 54 Sagittarius. So moon at 7 degrees 54 Sagittarius, and Zeus was at 22 degrees 57 Libra. So the moon was sesquiquadrate Zeus at the time of Russia's invasion. Semi-square. The moon was exactly semi-square Zeus at the time of Russia's invasion. That shooting, and so the shooting it was in the Maidan Square with the snipers, took place with the Sun aspecting Zeus, and then the invasion with the moon aspecting Zeus. So I think we're getting a pretty powerful picture of what Zeus can be like. And of course, I've just been looking at examples just now of either the moon or the sun sesquiquadrate or semi-square Zeus. This full moon, of course, is both the sun and the moon. Semi-square sesquiquadrate Zeus. So, I mean, again, which is one reason why I think that we might expect something quite dramatic with this aspect. Now, just a few people who have this aspect. Just to round it all off, I just talked a couple of days ago. I talked about Joan Vollmer. So Joan Vollmer was Bill Burroughs' wife, and Joan Vollmer was killed by Bill Burroughs. He shot her in the head. I mean, he was trying to shoot a glass off her head, but he missed, and I think he was drunk and he shot her in the head. He was trying to do his William Tell routine. But as far as Bill Burroughs' chart, here it is. this sort of famous American writer of the sort of the Beat generation, and there is his moon at 10 degrees 8 Gemini, making a 45-degree aspect to Zeus. And Bill Burroughs was obsessed with guns, completely obsessed with guns. And I think I saw a documentary on him. He would actually make art with guns. He would get these bits of wood and he would fire, he'd fire shotguns at bits of wood, and he'd sell the, sell them, I think. And so with his moon sesquiquadrate Zeus, I mean, it's how he responds. I mean, it could say something about his sexuality as well. That is a thought, but I'm not sure about that. But he had sort of moon, yes, certainly moon on the IC, and so that just gives us sort of the gun feel to it. And if you've got Zeus in your chart, strongly configured in your chart, that may say something about what you want to do. Sophie Scholl, for example, who protested against the Nazis and was and put up posters against the Second World War and what the Germans were doing, and was sort of executed by the Nazis. She had her Zeus at where's her Zeus gone? There it is. I keep losing Zeus. There it is, at 0 degrees Leo, and so she had. There's her. Where's it gone? So her moon is at 15 degrees 28. Was at 15 degrees 28 Gemini, and her Zeus was at 0 degrees 24 Leo. So the moon in a female chart, very much about her. So if you've got a woman who has moon exactly semi-square Zeus, this might be a woman who wants to take action, who feels she has to do stuff. She can't help herself if she disagrees with something. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the dangers are. It can be quite impulsive, and perhaps that moon semi-square Zeus described the way she responded to Nazism and how she felt compelled to put up posters, and in the end that led to her arrest and execution. And then finally there is the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte. So Mark Rutte, he was the Dutch Prime Minister, and he's Secretary General of NATO, and he's got his Zeus at 8 degrees 16 Virgo, and his moon is at 23 degrees 24 Aries. So Mark Rutte has moon sesquiquadrate Zeus, and the moon may be how he responds to the public. That's his public role. And Zeus is to do with violence, and he's Secretary General of NATO, and he's really enthusiastic about pushing forward with NATO's and Europe's war against Russia, and he's really enthusiastic about it. And I think that Zeus has an impact. And in fact, if you look at his chart, Zeus is less than 2 degrees from the ascendant. I mean, with Zeus, I prefer to use just 1 degree or less, but I think maybe as Secretary General of NATO, he was able to tune into his Zeus. So overall, I wanted to use these examples to just give you some idea about this full moon. I do think this full moon could be dangerous. I think that it could be about violence. It could be about explosions. If you are a politician, I would probably be inclined to stay away from the public eye, keep a low profile over the next few days, because there is a link with shooting and assassination. We saw with Indira Gandhi getting assassinated with the sun, with the sun semi-square, with sun semi-square Zeus. And additionally, there is the Aldebaran link And so we know with the Aldebaran and Antares, and so with Aldebaran can be, okay, it was linked with a violent death. I mean, remember, Sun conjunct Aldebaran, a violent death. And with Antares again, we get this idea of assassination potentially. So I'm not saying it's going to be an assassination over the next few days, but it's in the air, and it is quite explosive, and there are plenty of things that could go wrong. And we think about Iran, we think about Ukraine. It may be something else, something completely different. But I don't think on a collective level this full moon is particularly easy on a political level. At different countries and societies, great caution is required here. Now, on an individual level, it might be different. It might be a time when we can take action, when we can take successful action, because that's what it is about. We just don't want to hang around and doing nothing, but we have to make sure that we're not too impulsive. So now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of May the 30th and 31st, 2026. Aries. I think overall it should be quite a good weekend, not least because the moon is moving out of Scorpio. While the moon was moving through Scorpio, things weren't always easy, and maybe things were just sort of more difficult than you'd expected. When I say difficult, I'm not saying that there were difficult events. It just might have been the way you felt. And now that the moon is in Sagittarius, I think overall things are just more straightforward. And being an Aries, that's the way you'd like things to be. You want things to just unfold in a natural way, and as far as is possible, you want to be spontaneous and forward looking, and all of that can happen. And at the same time, you might regard other people as being easier to deal with. We have had this square aspect between Venus and Saturn, and Venus and Saturn can be about other people's attitudes, and not everyone has been in a particularly positive frame of mind. And while that Venus square Saturn is still in operation, it's just not quite as powerful as it was. So Aries, there might be sort of more space and more opportunities to express yourself. Yet there is a full moon. So what we've got the moon in Sagittarius making an opposition to the sun in Gemini. So moon in Sagittarius opposition with sun in Gemini. Well, you could see the moon in Sagittarius as being everything that you would like to do. And I think there are lots of things you'd like to do. You want to sort of break free. You want to be yourself. But you have to take into account the Gemini influence. And, it's worth thinking about the polarity between Sagittarius and Gemini. Sagittarius is into sort of exploration, doesn't want to have any bounds, just wants to sort of go freely out into the world and experience everything that's on offer. But sun in Gemini, there could be some thinking that is required. You may have to look at things in several different ways, and that could be annoying. Sometimes Aries can be impatient with argument, reasons why. Some people do talk too much. You can argue what's the phrase? You can argue how many fairies can dance on the head of a pin. I don't know if I've quite got that expression right, but that kind of argument just can seem absolutely pointless, especially when it is used to delay action. And why? But you shouldn't just be dismissive of argument. Sometimes it is necessary. And, when we're talking about a full moon, we're talking about sometimes the truth. seeing things for what they are. And it might well be that you have a set of beliefs which you might have held for a long time. Aries, at least the average Aries, often has a strong sort of moral code, and you have a sense of right and wrong, and sometimes you can sort of jump on your moral high horse. Yeah, you're quite capable of doing that, and you have to ask: is it really the right thing to be doing? Have you got it right? And it just could be that you might get upset about something, or you might want to really express your beliefs, but over an issue which is more complicated than it seems to be on the surface. And that might be a good reason why a bit of argument, a bit of discussion, might be a good idea. So don't feel that you can just use your beliefs to completely guide you. I mean, it's a great way of operating. Aries, obviously is a fire sign, and being a fire sign, it can be very quick. It can be very quick to make decisions. The average Aries, they can make decisions instantaneously because things are obvious, things are absolutely apparent. But not everything is apparent, and just there are a few things which really do have to be thought through, and that may take some time. And uncovering the truth may be something you have to start to consider doing over the weekend. Now, as far as other people are concerned, there just has been this square between Venus and Saturn, and that may say something about some of the people around you, some of the people you're close to, and not everyone has been on good form, but I think people are on better form. They're still in a rather fragile state of mind, but I think that they can perhaps be more forthcoming, and you can start to see a bit of optimism. And some people are optimistic for no particular reason. They believe that things can be better, and maybe your job, Aries, is to kind of foster this optimism. Give people hope, give people the opportunity to express themselves. And that is especially the case if you're dealing with people who are very, very close to you. Maybe they need help, they need support, and additionally, Aries, I think you're going to be quite good at making new friendships, making new contacts, and you'll know how to express yourself, and you can be quite assertive over the weekend. So if you have an opportunity to use that assertion or that sort of assertive talent, then I would have said go ahead. Taurus. Things are kind of changing, aren't they, with the moon moving out of Scorpio, and that moon in Scorpio for the average Taurus, might not have been especially easy. You had to worry perhaps about what people were thinking, and you realized that you weren't in complete control. And maybe you had to deal with, other people's feelings. People might try to keep their feelings to themselves, but you were still aware of it, and you were also aware of your own feelings. And it wasn't always easy. And furthermore, Taurus, you just had Venus making a square to Saturn. I mean, that was rather a miserable aspect, Venus square Saturn. And I've got my ascendant in Taurus, so I think I felt that Venus square Saturn. Maybe I still feel that Venus square Saturn, feeling a little bit grim, and not feeling that things were going entirely my way. And I'm hoping that now that Venus moves away from that square of Saturn, things should be easier. That I can perhaps be, a little more positive. But, we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about you. And we have the moon changing sign. We have the moon moving out of Scorpio and into Sagittarius. In fact, we've got a full moon. We've got the moon in Sagittarius opposition the sun in Gemini, and this full moon, people are talking about it a great deal. I mean, they have to, don't they? I mean, a full moon is supposedly a big event. Now, for you, Taurus, I don't think that this full moon need to be especially important, all things being equal. But, if it focuses on anything, I would have said there could well be a financial side to this full moon. After all, Gemini, Sagittarius represents the financial axis of your chart, and if you look at your finances over the weekend, then it might occur to you that things aren't entirely straightforward. I mean, it doesn't mean that things are going to actually be difficult, but they're just not straightforward. And as soon as you start that process of discovery in a financial sense, then you start to see things. You become aware of new information. And to begin with, it might not be entirely easy. Once you become aware of something, you can't just make yourself unaware. And it just might occur to you that something is complicated and maybe needs to be dealt with sooner rather than later. But you're becoming aware of this because you made the effort. It might be that you're going through spreadsheets. It may be you're just doing some thinking. You actually think about something, or you open a bill, or there's some financial statement that you for one reason or another you didn't want to worry about, but when you actually look at it, it has implications. Or you ask questions all about someone else. Maybe someone else knows all about money. Maybe they know all about your money, and you hadn't bothered to ask. You just assume everything was fine, and when you do ask, then it's not simple at all. Now, being a Taurus, I think you'd like things to be simple, but I just don't think they are. But it's a good thing, this full moon, because what this full moon is doing is just making you aware of everything. It's allowing you to see things, really, as they are. And okay, Venus is still square Saturn, as I said at the beginning of this piece. So your first reaction to awareness, being aware of something, may be to feel really quite negative, to think that this is bad. But when you think again, you'll see that the situation isn't quite so bad. I mean, it's not bad at all, really. And you start to see the way forward. And now might be a time to tell yourself that Venus is now making a conjunction to Jupiter. Okay, it's still a long way off, 10 degrees, and we've got Venus, your ruler, at 14 degrees Cancer, moving towards Jupiter, 24 degrees Cancer. So less than 10 degrees between Venus and Jupiter. And you could argue that that Venus Jupiter conjunction for the average Taurus is one of the best aspects of the year. Now, I don't want to overhype this Venus-Jupiter conjunction because, like so many things in astrology, it can just end up as being just a disappointment. Just me, other astrologers going on and on about this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, getting excited about it, and then it happens and nothing. Don't be complacent. I'm not promising this Venus-Jupiter conjunction is going to deliver. It certainly isn't going to deliver. I mean, 99% isn't going to deliver if you do nothing. But maybe you should be starting to think about opportunities, as this Venus-Jupiter conjunction moves into awareness, you can start thinking about what you can do. And so you can contrast this with the full moon. So the full moon is perhaps telling you that things aren't entirely straightforward, that there are things that need to be dealt with, and that might bother you. But if you think ahead, Taurus, then you can start to become aware of what might be possible. And so I think there is very much a positive message here. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, okay, we've got this full moon, and I've talked about the full moon in a financial sense. I mean, there is an emotional dimension to this full moon. Moon in Sagittarius. That can be quite emotional. I mean, I know that Sagittarius is not an emotional sign, or not a particularly emotional sign, Taurus, but in your chart it possibly is. And so the moon you can see the moon in Scorpio as being about potentially another person, you and the other, you becoming aware of another person. Moon in Sagittarius perhaps becomes aware of the consequences of another person. Yeah, they're there. Now you see their consequences. So if you are spending time with someone else, particularly if you don't know this person very well, it could be that the moon in Sagittarius, opposition the sun in Gemini, does inform you about what a person is really like on an emotional level. Now, it could be something very pleasant. You can start to become aware of the depths of another person's personality, but you can also be aware that psychologically they may not be entirely straightforward. I mean, I don't mean that in a sort of a crazy way, just someone being psychologically multidimensional, shall I put it. And everyone is psychologically multidimensional, but when you become aware of all the sides of someone's personality, things you may not be straightforward, and you have to ask how straightforward you want things to be. So nothing is entirely simple, and not every relationship is entirely simple. Maybe no relationship is simple if it's taken far enough. Gemini, full moon. Yeah, there's a full moon, and the full moon is in Sagittarius, and this full moon is likely to have a big impact on the average Gemini. So, this full moon is in Sagittarius. In other words, the moon is in Sagittarius, and the sun is in moon is in Sagittarius, and the sun's in Gemini. And this full moon, it's on a fixed star. Pretty close. You've got the moon on sort of Antares, the sun on Aldebaran. So that makes potentially this full moon quite intense and not entirely straightforward. With this full moon, there could be a certain amount of anger, and the anger would be particularly strong if you can't get your way. You want to be noticed, but how much do you want to be noticed, and how much should you be noticed? And when we're talking about this full moon, it's likely to say something about other people, how you relate to other people. The moon is in Sagittarius, and Sagittarius, you could argue, is everything that you're not, everything that you are least aware of, about yourself. So maybe every Gemini has the fantasy of being a Sagittarius. You think of a textbook Sagittarius as someone who is loud, shoots their mouth off perhaps on a negative sense, is tactless, but at the same time, is a free spirit, and is adventurous. All the things that the average Gemini would like to be. All the things that the average Gemini maybe talks a lot about, but doesn't actually experience, because that can be the Gemini way of doing things. A lot of talking, a lot of thinking, but nothing actually happens. That can be a problem of being a Gemini. Speaking as someone who has their sun in Gemini, I talk a lot, but as far as action is concerned, things aren't necessarily so rosy. Just too much talking, too many ideas, and it all goes nowhere. But perhaps this full moon is a reminder of what can be done, and you may see that through the lens of another person. So you see another person behaving in a particular way, and deep down it might be the kind of behavior you aspire to, but consciously you don't necessarily approve of it. And with this full moon, you have a chance to see someone for what they really are. And it's not just seeing another person for what they really are, it's for seeing your own responses to another person for what they really are. So if you have built up a load of feelings about another person, or maybe an opinion about another person, then maybe this full moon will put the whole thing to the test. Were you right? What is this other person really like? So if you are in any relationship, this full moon might really make things very clear to you. And if you are completely honest with yourself, then I think that this full moon can be extremely revealing. It can show you what you can do. It can perhaps show you where the opportunities lie, and maybe it could be about someone new in your life. And we think about full moons just as being about endings, but it can be about something new happening. It could be you feeling that you need someone else's help, that you maybe need to be in a relationship, or at least you need to get closer to another person. So that is an important aspect, of this full moon. I mean, I'm not saying that this full moon should be feared. I don't think so. I'm not particularly afraid of this full moon, although I am perhaps slightly concerned about the fact that the sun is on Aldebaran, the moon is on Antares, so this full moon could bring about sort of a bit of sort of trouble and strife. That is possible. Of course, trouble and strife, that's Cockney rhyming slang for a wife, isn't it? Isn't that what they say? Trouble and strife, apples and pears, stairs. Trouble and strife is the wife. I don't know. That's how the fixed stars can work. Kind of depends on your situation, doesn't it? With that full moon. Relationships should not be trivialized with this full moon. You shouldn't just assume everything's going to be fine. You can just be your normal Gemini self. Not necessarily, and you have to take people seriously, and perhaps take people's emotions seriously. And Moon in Sagittarius can represent a reaction. It could be about someone being very blunt to you. They might be critical. They might be honest, but you should not be, afraid of honesty. I think it's something that can really, really help you, and help you at least understand yourself. And that's what full moons are all about: sort of awareness. And in terms of the relationship theme, I think relationships, regardless of this full moon, can be important this weekend. I think on balance, your ability to get on with people, is pretty good. And right at the end of a weekend, we have a sextile between Mercury and Chiron, and this Mercury Chiron sextile is in late degrees. You see that actually Mercury is right at the end of Gemini. That's kind of crept up on us, hasn't it? Yeah. But Mercury, just before it moves into Cancer, makes a sextile to Chiron, and I would have thought that this Mercury sextile Chiron, is quite positive. It reminds you of how unique you are, and if you feel that things need to be done differently, maybe this is something you need to express, especially at the end of a weekend. And this might also say something about your social life, how you deal with friends, associates, and so on. You might find that you get encouragement from an unexpected quarter with this Mercury sextile Chiron. But it is a late degree sextile, and I should just finish by just reminding you, Mercury is about to leave Gemini. All things being equal, Mercury going through Gemini was good, because Mercury was moving through your sign. It's by next week it's going to be in Cancer, so maybe you won't be able to benefit so much from having Mercury in Gemini. But on the other hand, Mercury in Gemini can think too much, and lots of ideas, but were those ideas really any good? Did they actually go anywhere? And maybe when Mercury moves into Cancer, you'll be challenged to turn your ideas into something more real and down to earth. So maybe it's not such a bad thing that Mercury is about to move into Cancer, but perhaps over the weekend, with this full moon, with Mercury moving through the last few degrees of Gemini, there's something you can understand and also get together. Cancer. Full moon. Full moons matter. It's a critical stage of the lunation cycle. It's a peak of the lunation cycle, when things really make themselves apparent, and you understand things like never before. At the same time, with the full moon, your moods can be quite changeable. You can move from one thing to another, and you can be warm and friendly one moment, and quite sort of cold and aloof the next moment. When I say cold and aloof, I'm talking about how you appear to be on the surface. I mean, deep down, you have powerful emotions, but in terms of outside appearances, Cancer, this full moon can make you seem rather changeable, and that can be a Cancerian thing. Just perhaps being friendly one moment, being detached the next, or appearing to be detached, and you realize that something has reached its conclusion over the weekend, and you see how things are, and additionally, Cancer, you see what is wrong. It might have been staring you in the face for a long time, but now you open your eyes and you see that some things are just really badly arranged. There's a certain thoughtlessness to the arrangement. It's not your thoughtlessness, it may be someone else's thoughtlessness. And your natural your natural inclination is to just deal with it. You really want the thing to be resolved. And if you act in a sort of free and spontaneous way, Cancer, then yes, things can be cleared up very quickly. And part of your advantage is you just have a vision. You have an organizational vision. You just know how things should be placed. You don't have to spend ages thinking about it, planning it. It's all completely obvious. And I think that is something perhaps to be welcoming about this full moon. Also, with this full moon, you maybe start to get a glimpse of the process by which things become chaotic and disorganized. And it's easy to blame other people for disorganization and chaos, but it's possible that there are sort of unconscious processes at work. Things just kind of move on their own. I mean, it might be you moving them, but they just move, and there's just this constant shifting around you, which you're not fully aware of, and then before you know it, it's all right in front of you, and it needs to be dealt with, and so maybe you get an insight into how your unconscious interacts with the material world. You can almost kind of catch yourself doing things, even catch yourself creating chaos. So that's something that really could be happening, and there may be moments of surprise. I mean, this full moon it's kind of tied up with Uranus. I mean, not exactly, but we've got Uranus Uranus at 2 degrees Gemini, and this full moon is at 9 degrees Gemini. So this full moon certainly could be chaotic, and it could be about things just happening in a way that you just hadn't planned for, you hadn't realized, and it's kind of not what you wanted. But again, this full moon is about awareness, and perhaps being aware of how you might be tripping yourself up. Additionally, there could be a health dimension to the full moon. So, Sagittarius full moon, it happens usually once a year. Okay, it can happen twice a year if you've got a full moon. If you've got a full moon, for example, if you've got a full moon at 0 degrees Gemini, you could then have if you have a full moon at 0 degrees Sagittarius, you could have another full moon at 29 degrees Sagittarius. But anyway, this year there's just one full moon. And full moons are about realization, and you might see something about your own health and the way you've been looking after yourself, the way you've been eating, exercising. It's not just your physical health; it could be your psychological health, and something might just suddenly occur to you. It might occur to you that maybe you've been doing something which hasn't been very sensible. Again, I'm not giving any medical advice here. I'm really talking about lifestyle. But if you just look at what you're doing, maybe looking at what you're eating, looking at the kind of environment you're in, it just might occur to you that actually, to Cancer, things could be better, and it might also relate to something you read. You might read something in a newspaper or online which talks about health, and it seems relevant to your health, and it might seem to be a revelation, and you might want to take instant action. Although with health, things change very quickly and opinions change very quickly. So just because you have a revelation about your health and your lifestyle, doesn't necessarily mean that it is the truth. And maybe what matters more is how you respond. And so perhaps we could say, don't exaggerate. So if you hear that or read that a particular action is unhealthy, an action that you have been taking a lot, maybe something you've been eating or doing or whatever, you shouldn't necessarily jump to conclusions. But health-wise, I think that at the moment you are quick to respond to the information you are receiving, and it might be that you're being sort of too quick to respond. So I think it's important not to exaggerate. Leo, this full moon is not necessarily going to be easy. Yeah, I'd love to say it was going to be easy, but it could present a few issues. And one thing it could do is make you rather negative. And okay, I know this isn't kind of what you want to hear, and I certainly don't want to exaggerate anything. But if you looked at my description of this full moon, I don't know whether you're watching the whole video or you're just looking at what I say on Leo. But at the beginning of this video, I described the full moon, and this full moon is not quite what it seems to be, and this full moon, might encourage Leo a bit of sort of negative thinking. You might be thinking about the things that could go wrong, and it might perhaps be made worse if you spend too much time listening to other people. This is a time in general, Leo, when you want to be sociable, when you are interested in what other people have to say, what other people have to do, but you have to ask yourself whether they're really being constructive. And with this full moon, you're quite able to see things as they are. You're quite able to be challenged. Every full moon has an impact on the average Leo, because the full moon involves the sun. The sun is your ruler, and with this full moon, you might just see things as it is. And when you see things as it is, or you see things as they are, you start to have a bad feeling. Is it really like that? And you start to think about the consequences. And, when you start to think about the consequences, it might just occur to you that, things are just not as good as they seem to be. And you are aware of how bad things could end up in an imperfect world. But this is exacerbated, if you allow yourself to be overly influenced by other people. And maybe, ideally, you wouldn't be. You would do things, on your own. You certainly wouldn't be looking for approval from someone else or from some other group. Some group you might respect. You want to do the right thing. You don't want to rock the boat. But Leo, you're a very creative sign. Leo, you could argue, is the most individualistic sign. It's all about the self. And right now we've got the moon in Sagittarius, and so with the moon in Sagittarius, a very creative placement for the moon. It should be about what you can do and what you can do well. But when the moon is opposition the sun, of course, the definition of a full moon is moon opposition sun. So when the moon is opposition the sun, there is pressure. So, where does that pressure come from? The pressure, in the first instance, kind of comes from you. It almost comes from your super ego. The super ego is kind of, I don't know, it's a long time since I've read about Freud, but, the super ego is that part of ourselves which incorporates the rules and norms of society that we get from our parents, and we kind of integrate it, and we're telling ourselves that there's some things we should do, something we shouldn't be doing. We have to be responsible, and it can be very self-conscious, and you don't want to be too self-conscious. I mean, you have to take into account society. You have to listen to your friends if you've got friends, but you don't want to take things too far. And with the moon in Sagittarius, it's perhaps a challenge. It's perhaps the challenge here is just to be yourself, not to worry about what other people are thinking, doing, claiming. external pressure. It's just not something that you should be worrying about too much. But Leo, you do have to accept that you live in a social world, and that's just the way it is. And so you don't want to be overly negative, feel that you're overly pressured, but just some Leos might find that it just all gets under your skin. You just can feel that pressure and that frustration. And so you might not always be responding to this full moon in a particularly constructive way, and you just might regard it as being something that you don't really want to deal with, but you have to deal with. And this full moon is tied up with Jupiter. We've got a semi-square between the Sun and Jupiter, and Jupiter's been moving through Cancer since last year. I think the beginning of June of last year, it's been moving through Cancer, and that says a lot about sort of unconscious processes. And so there's a lot going on at an unconscious level which might be having some impact on you. And if something is unconscious, it can just be ever so slightly twisted, and it can be a distractor. It can be a distractor. And so there is scope for you turning this whole thing into something sort of more difficult than it need be. And perhaps in the end, Leo, we have to sort of strip this full moon down to its main point. Full moon. This full moon's in Sagittarius. It's in a fire sign. You are a fire sign. Sagittarius is a very creative sign, and if you are doing something that you enjoy and something that you're good at, and you largely ignore outside pressure, then I don't think that you'll go too far wrong. Virgo. Mercury is it's in late Gemini now. It really is in late Gemini. I kind of hadn't really noticed this, but I just now you'd look, Mercury's it's not retrograde, it's moving quite quickly now, and Mercury is at 27 degrees Gemini, so it's on the verge of leaving Gemini and moving into Cancer. And Mercury does well in Gemini. Even though it's late Gemini, there's a lot you can realize. There's a lot that you can really understand, and perhaps that's what you should be thinking about, over the weekend. And perhaps you should be thinking about how it's all going. In terms of your ambitions, for example. I hope that now is a time when you are ambitious, when you can actually use your mind to understand, what the way forward is. And there are lots of places you want to go. When I say places, I mean I'm talking about states of mind and also activities. Because don't forget, Uranus is now in Gemini, been in Gemini for some time. But Uranus is a planet of revolution, and over the next 6 years, it is a time for Virgos to really rethink what they want to do. They want to rethink their direction, their ambitions, perhaps, if the circumstances are right, to rethink your career, whatever it is. And Mercury being in the same sign as Uranus, and Mercury and Uranus kind of have a relationship to one another. They're quite similar energies. I mean, Uranus is a bit crazier than Mercury, perhaps, but while Mercury is in the last few degrees of Gemini, you can really start to work things out and really start to understand things. And also, we've got a full moon. So this full moon, I think, is important for you, Virgo. You've got the moon in Sagittarius, Sun in Gemini, a full moon across an important axis of your chart. This full moon might bring into contrast, on one hand, the future, your ambitions, all the things you want to do. And on the other hand, the past. And the past can also relate to your family and your home and all the reminders of the past. So there are kind of two pulls going on with this full moon. On one hand, you're being pulled forward towards the future, but yeah, you're also being pulled backwards. And the less secure you feel, the more you're going to be pulled backwards, because what you are kind of looking for is some kind of grounding. You want roots. You want to know that you've always got somewhere that you can fall back on. And so if you're feeling completely comfortable with your roots, then the full moon is going to be much easier to deal with, because you've done the groundwork, and so you can now start to think about the future in a positive and optimistic way. So it kind of depends on you, but if you feel very sorted out and at one with yourself, then I don't think this full moon is going to present much of a problem. Okay, it could be that there's a bit of interaction between your family and your home, and how that influences your ambitions, and there might be a few things to be negotiated, but nothing too serious. But if there's a gap here, if you're not feeling particularly secure as you move into the full moon, then it might be more difficult, but also more constructive, because I think that you can start to see what needs to be done. And when we're talking about a full moon, of course, we're talking about the truth. We're talking about a revelation. When I say truth, I mean your truth, not my truth, your truth, whatever that truth might be. Kind of a subjective truth, but you see it for what it is. And maybe with this full moon, because it's close to Uranus. I mean, okay, the moon is close to the opposition of Uranus. There might be a surprise. When you think about what you would like to do, you might realize something, and you finally get it. Finally you understand something, and then by the end of the weekend, as Mercury moves towards the very end of Gemini, it makes a sextile to Chiron. And this sextile Chiron, maybe it's an aspect that's optional. You don't have to worry about the Mercury sextile Chiron if you don't want to. But this Mercury sextile Chiron, it could be quite creative, and it perhaps allows you to tune into your own individuality, and your individuality not just on a mental level, but perhaps on an emotional level as well. And in the process, you might become aware of some ability, some sort of secret ability, an ability that is kind of understated, that maybe you don't normally talk about. And if we're talking about Chiron, well, we could be talking about healing. You may become aware that there's something you can do that really is of value, and so that might link to what you do in society, the good you can do in society. But it might also highlight just some, ability you have, which you hadn't in the past taken seriously, but it's an ability that perhaps can benefit other people. Though there is another way of looking at Mercury sextile Chiron, and that just might be you wanting to be heard, and you not caring how other people respond to you, because it's just important to be heard. If people don't like you, well, that's their problem, or rather, if they don't like your message, well, then they're just going to have to deal with it. So if you want to be strident, even outrageous at the end of a weekend, then maybe you can be, but at the same time, you don't want to undermine yourself. I mean, security still matters. I mean, this is a full moon, which is about ensuring that things are secure, because you need to be secure if you want to move forward. And it is a time for Virgos to move forward, even after Mercury moves out of Gemini into Cancer. And Uranus in Gemini is going to drive you forward over the next 6 years. Libra. Libra, well, we've got a full moon over the weekend, and this full moon I don't think is especially important. I mean, it affects everyone, but I'm not convinced that this full moon absolutely matters to you, that it's something that you have to take super seriously. I mean, full moons happen. Full moons happen every month, so it's not exactly a hugely significant event. And this full moon, if it affects you, Libra, could be in the realm of ideas, and perhaps some of your ideas are going to be challenged. You thought you understood everything. You thought everything was clear, and then something happens, or maybe someone says something, and you have to reconsider. So don't be too set in your ways. But on the other hand, with this full moon, don't allow yourself to be totally distracted. So you might be trying to work things out in your own way, and then something happens, or you have a realization, and you immediately want to chase this realization. We've got moon opposition sun. Moon is also making an opposition to Uranus, so you could get distracted by things that actually may be trivial, that sound important, that sound of sort of even a sort of earth splitting significance, that they're asking you to just drop everything and engage, but maybe you don't have to. And instead, work on yourself, in your own way, and your job might just be to gather information. You don't have to do anything with this information, and slowly, develop the picture, and not feel that the whole picture has to be developed super quickly, because I don't think it does have to be. And if you're making sense of something in your own way, then just keep going, and maybe you can then sort of ignore the drama of this full moon. But if we look at the full moon in the most positive way, I think that this full moon, might start revealing to you a possibility that maybe hadn't occurred to you before. But you now are able to look at things, at a higher level. You're not just looking down at what you are doing right now. You are thinking about possibilities. You're thinking about the future, and maybe at some level you are becoming more future orientated, and you're starting to have ideas about what the future could look like. Now, some of these ideas might seem unrealistic, but I wouldn't worry about it right now. So if you start thinking about some possibility that seems far-fetched, just don't automatically dismiss it, because with the right level of work, it is absolutely possible that that it could happen, and you may just have this quiet feeling that things really are working, and this quiet feeling might be sort of underpinned by the fact that Venus and Jupiter are getting closer and closer. So as May draws to a close, Venus and Jupiter are getting closer and closer to one another. They are now less than 10 degrees apart. Venus is at 14 Cancer, Jupiter's at 24 Cancer, so less than 10 degrees apart. And between now and June the 9th, Venus and Jupiter will come together. They will be exact. They will be exact in a very important sector of your chart that can relate to your ambitions. And so maybe some of your ambitions are really starting to come into focus over the weekend. And there might be an apparent lack of realism, wanting something that just cannot happen, at least in its raw form. But then the challenge is to work on it, over the next 10 days, and to take something that on the surface seems impossible, but actually to make it real. And so I think many Librans are becoming aware of what is possible. And I think the month could end on quite a satisfactory and even optimistic note. And with the full moon as well, it could just try to make you be realistic. And it's good to see the truth. I mean, it's always good to know the truth, but sometimes you can know the truth too much, and you can get sort of hyper truth. And so hyper truth, it's hyper realism. There are forces out there that want you to be realistic, and they kind of want you to limit yourself, and they want you to limit your ambitions. And those forces need to be resisted, because at the moment, Libra, with this conjunction between Venus and Jupiter getting closer and closer, this is a time to really, really make the most of Jupiter in Cancer, and Jupiter in Cancer really can work for you. And so I'm really optimistic about the next 10 days. But you've got to do something. You can't just wait for good luck to come knocking on your door. Well, if you do that, nothing's going to happen. But you've just got to create those opportunities through your own effort and positivity. Scorpio. The moon is now moving into Sagittarius. So the moon moves into Sagittarius London time at, when is it? 1:45 in the afternoon on Saturday. So that's sort of in the morning, on Saturday morning if you're in the Americas. So really Scorpio, for most of the weekend, the moon is in Scorpio. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon... Sorry, did I say Scorpio? For most of the weekend, the moon is in Sagittarius. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, then Saturday is going to be moon in Scorpio, Sunday is going to be moon in Sagittarius. So, it kind of depends. But there is this changeover from Scorpio to Sagittarius. I think moon in Scorpio has been okay for you. I think you like having the moon in your sign. But when the moon moves into Sagittarius, you have to start to perhaps be more realistic. You can have all sorts of ideas, all sorts of feelings, but are they real? Are they manageable? And you have to perhaps be more focused. And this time round, with the moon moving into Sagittarius, well, it's a full moon. Moon in Sagittarius makes an opposition to the sun in Gemini. And this Sagittarius full moon, it could have a financial side to it. After all, it's across the financial axis, of your chart, and you might not be wanting to think about money, but money may be difficult to avoid. And when we're talking about full moons, we might be talking about a realization. You see something about your own money. And then the question, Scorpio, is this something you should be trying to avoid? If you deliberately avoid anything to do with money, you could say, well, you could avoid the full moon, you could avoid that realization. But full moons, they don't just last one day or one weekend. I mean, they can last for a couple of weeks. And you've got the sun moving through Gemini. Gemini is a sign which, from a Scorpio perspective, can be very much about money. So I'm not really sure whether it's anything you can really avoid. And I think that Scorpio, as far as is possible, you should try to be, realistic and down to earth. And if you have an opportunity to find something out about your own money, or indeed about other people's money as well, I think you should avail yourself of this opportunity. It might not be what you want, but you shouldn't be afraid of the truth. I mean, Scorpio is a sign that, that is often connected with detective work. looking under things, leaving no stone unturned. And if you are brave and you accept things, as they are, you don't shy away from anything, then I think that's the right approach. And you might get early warning about something, because there may be something which has got a deadline, which has to be done by a particular date. That date may be pretty close, and if you don't do anything about it, if you look away, then you might miss the deadline. And it's not necessarily just about money. It just could be about sort of bureaucratic stuff, administrative things, just some deadline that needs to be understood, and additionally, you can give yourself advanced warning about something. If you're the first person to understand something, then that gives you an advantage. So that may say something about the weekend. Now, this full moon, may not just be about material stuff. It's quite an emotional full moon. I mean, it doesn't sound like it, does it? Moon in Sagittarius, Sun in Gemini. Those are two signs that are not regarded as being particularly emotional. But from a Sagittarian perspective, a Scorpio perspective, they do have an emotional side. And they're about sort of you understanding the depths of human feeling, in that Scorpio way, but it's kind of intensified at the time of this full moon. And Scorpio, you might start to understand the emotional consequences of something, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you perhaps have an opportunity to think about whether it's worth pursuing something. Maybe you're thinking about getting involved in something which, to begin with, seemed fairly straightforward, but when you start to appreciate the emotional side of things, it may be something that you don't necessarily want to be fully involved with. Yet, as far as other people are concerned, Scorpio, things don't look so bad. Venus was making a square to Saturn. Okay, Venus is still making a square to Saturn, but that square Saturn is not as close as it was on Friday. And so it might be that people who had been difficult or troubled very recently are starting to calm down. They're starting to be more relaxed. They're starting to sort of get a sense of perspective. And so just because someone had been difficult over the last couple of days doesn't mean to say they're going to continue being difficult. And it may be that there are certain people in your life who are going through a process of not just reevaluation, but also improvement. And so it's important, Scorpio, in terms of relationships, not necessarily to write anyone off. You shouldn't, assume that recent behavior is going to continue into the future, because I do think that there's evidence here that, things are getting better on a sort of an interpersonal level. I'm not saying things were bad in the first place, but if you've been disappointed by someone or felt that someone was not firing on all cylinders, you might see that, there is some improvement. Sagittarius. The moon is moving into your sign. To be precise, the moon moves into Sagittarius at 1:45 on Saturday afternoon, London time. So if you're in the Americas, the moon will move into Sagittarius on Saturday morning. If you're in UK, Europe, Africa, then it will be Saturday afternoon. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then really Saturday sees the moon moving through Scorpio, Sunday moon moving through Sagittarius. So there's a bit of a difference depending on your time zone, but still the moon is moving into your sign, and because it's moving into your sign at a time when the sun is in Gemini, it means we've got a full moon. And this full moon is in Sagittarius. So a Sagittarius full moon is a big event. It's your full moon. And it's it's a full moon, which may say quite a lot about other people, the various relationships in your life. I mean, after all, this full moon, moon in Sagittarius, opposition the sun in Gemini, can be about other people. And when you're dealing with full moons, you're often dealing with a revelation. You're seeing things for what they really are. They're stripped of triviality. All the decorations get removed, all the pretense. You can see the situation in absolute clear detail, and you understand what matters. And this does apply to other people. Maybe in the past it had been a guessing game. You'd made assumptions. You weren't quite sure. But now it's becoming clear. And this full moon, well, it's taking place over this weekend. But, full moons do last. It certainly can last for the next couple of weeks. So as you move into June, Sagittarius, you'll start to understand, what people are like, what they can do for you, and how they might be a problem. So, do think about, all of the relationships you are in, and think about how they are working for you, or maybe they're not working for you at all. And so this full moon could represent a change. So a relationship had been moving in a particular way, and maybe there was a certain amount of complacency, and it was just a part of your life. Then you see the truth of the matter, and having seen the truth of the matter, you might want to act accordingly. And when I say the truth of the matter, I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way. It can be in a good way. You can see how wonderful another person is. Now, with the moon in Sagittarius, opposition the sun, you could argue that the moon is in a somewhat weakened state because it's opposition the sun. I mean, the sun is a difficult energy for the moon to be opposition, and that moon in Sagittarius, could say something about you, and it's about you trying to be yourself, but also being up against people who may, at least in a short term, have more power than you. At least that might be your perception. And so at the immediate time of the full moon, this full moon, I think is on Sunday, but at the time of this full moon, you might just feel that there's not much you can do, and you're dealing with a person who may be stronger than you. You may be dealing with a situation that seems stronger than you. Now, it might be in terms of physical action. There isn't much you can do. You just have to accept things as they are short term. But as you move into next week, as you move into the new month, you've had the revelation. You've seen how people behave, and you're then in a position to, make decisions. And, it might occur to you that something has to change, and also that something has to change maybe in quite a radical way. That things just aren't quite good enough, and that things are not going to change gradually. Things can only change in a way that is very sudden and perhaps somewhat forced. And who's doing the forcing? Well, I think you might be doing the forcing. It's no good. Something is no good, and it's just got to be smashed. I mean, I don't mean literally smashed, but that's how you do it. You break out, but don't exaggerate. Don't do anything too extreme. But this full moon, is kind of linked up with Jupiter, because this full moon is at about 9 degrees Sagittarius. Jupiter, your ruler, is at 24 degrees Cancer. So this full moon is actually sesquiquadrate Jupiter. So because it's sesquiquadrate Jupiter, it does get to you. And I do think it is challenging. And I do think it might actually be sort of quite emotionally challenging. And if you really think about it, you just might feel ever so stuck with this full moon. Or it's not the full moon which is making you feel stuck. Let me rephrase that. It's not the full moon that is making you stuck. It is the full moon that is making you realize that you are stuck. So the full moon is kind of your friend, but it's also pushing you. And Sagittarius, it's pushing you to do something. And maybe you have delayed for long enough and something has been building up. And now you realize that now is the time. So what are you going to do? And I've just said you shouldn't do anything super dramatic. You don't fully think through. It's not like that, but maybe some action is being called for, and that's something to think about as you move into the new week and the new month. So I don't though want to leave you feeling too negative. I mean, I think this full moon is a positive because it encourages you to take action, and in fact, it encourages you to take fortunate action. And don't forget, Venus is moving towards a conjunction of Jupiter. Venus is not just a planet of relationships; it's a planet of good fortune, and it really does emphasize the fact that Jupiter, your ruler, is in Cancer. It's in the sign of its exaltation. Venus and Jupiter are now in. They are now less than 10 degrees apart now. I mean, we've already hit the 10-degree mark. So the conjunction is starting to activate. And in spite of the drama of the full moon, you're starting to feel that there is a new situation coming up, and it's a situation that you can benefit from. And it might be a situation that relates to another person. Not everyone can be trusted. Some people might be disappointing, but Venus might represent perhaps someone new on the horizon, or certainly a new situation on the horizon that I think could work very much in your favour. Capricorn. The full moon this weekend may not be so significant. I mean, there's a lot of talk about this full moon, and people get excited by it. People have to get excited about every full moon, particularly if they're making YouTube videos. I mean, I put up this YouTube video, and it's a full moon, so I'm kind of hoping that lots of people will watch this video. So I've got to kind of dramatize it, isn't that right? On the other hand, I'm putting a video up on. I'm actually making this recording on Friday, so videos that I put up on Friday don't tend not to do as well as videos that I put up on a Thursday or a Wednesday, for example. So you've got to hype the video, haven't you, to get as much attention as possible. But how significant is this full moon? How significant is it for you? I don't think it need be especially significant if you don't want it to be significant. It's kind of up to you. So, this full moon is in Sagittarius, and being in Sagittarius, well, that is the sign before Capricorn. So, as far as you're concerned, this full moon could be sort of quite understated. I mean, okay, you're aware that some things are changing, that some things are maybe sort of reaching their peak. I mean, this full moon, after all, represents, the peak of the lunar cycle. And so you can really see how things are developing, how things have developed. But I just don't think it's anything that you necessarily have to worry about too much. Now, it could, though, say something about other people. So if you are an observer of other people, you're in a fairly social environment. I mean, we're all in a social environment to some extent. It just might occur to you that some people are in a process of change, and they might be moving from one thing to another. So if you're in a relationship or you're closely involved with another person, then this full moon might be about their behavior, the things people say, the things people do. They might not be very sure of themselves. because they're moving from maybe one realization to another, and maybe at the same time they're not being entirely truthful about their inner motivations. And you can just understand that. That's just the way it is, the way it's working, and you don't have to respond. And I think that is an important point about this full moon. Your first inclination with this full moon might be to act. You act because of events. You act because of what other people are doing. But maybe the key to this full moon, at least for you, is actually just doing nothing. Just informing yourself of what is going on, and the time for action might not be until next week, beginning of next week. When the moon goes into Capricorn. When moon goes into Capricorn, it will make a trine to Mars, and so that's perhaps a time, Capricorn, when you have to really start to sort of move things forward. But right now it's possibly just a time when you can reflect, and you can write your notes, and at a later stage you can make the right decision. Now, one thing I probably should point out is that Venus and Jupiter are now getting quite close to one another. They are less than 10 degrees apart. And this goes back perhaps to other people. And, you've had Jupiter in Cancer for a long time, for the best part of a year. And Jupiter will stay in Cancer for just another month. And then changes sign, and it won't return to Cancer for another 11 years or so. And so with Venus moving towards a conjunction to Jupiter, that might well say something about certain other people. And I mean that in a positive way. So over the next 10 days between now and something like June the 9th, as this Venus-Jupiter conjunction becomes exact, it might well be that there are some people that could just really be an important part of your life, if you give them a chance. And so, really try and work with other people. To begin with, it's about making observations, trying to work out, which people can be trusted, which people can work in a way that is positive for you and your interests. So do keep an eye out for that as you move into next week, because from a social interpersonal point of view, I just think that this Venus Jupiter conjunction can work in a really sort of very positive way. Aquarius, full moon. I have to go through all the 12 signs, and I have to tell each of the 12 signs how this full moon is going to impact them. So some signs are going to be more affected than others. I think Aquarius, this full moon, is unlikely to have a major impact on you. I don't think it's a full moon that you have to sort of worry about. I think its impact is going to be fairly subtle. It could be about changes in your social life. You have sort of ideas about who your friends are and how your friends are going to behave. And you might be surprised, and you might have some insights. So I don't know how many friends you have. I'm going to go. It's with myself. I'm 64 today. It's my birthday. I wasn't talking about my birthday in this video, but it was a full moon, so the full moon got in my way. And being 64, thinking about friends, as you get older, you have, it feels, at least from my perspective, you have fewer and fewer friends. How many friends do I have? I don't know. I think I've probably got about 2 friends, maybe. I don't know. I don't think I've got many friends. Do I feel myself to be friendless? Not really. But anyway, with this full moon, it might be that you start to see your friends and associates in a new way, and it might be that certain friendships have had their day. They're not really working anymore. And on a positive note, it could also be about new friendships and actually recognizing who your real friends are. And when we ask that question, who are your real friends? That's a kind of a more general question. We're talking about other people in general. Some people, Aquarius, they work for you. They work, in your favor. Other people are just a drag. They're just a drain on your resources. And I think that with this full moon, you really can recognize this. And I do think, though, that friendship is important. Even if you don't have many friends, it's important to really value the friends that you do have. And that might be something you want to do, over the weekend and over the next couple of weeks as well. But, broadening things out, we are thinking also about your future. We're always thinking about the future. Where are you going? How are you developing things? How do you move beyond mere ambition? And when you move beyond ambition, you start to think about, where it is you really want to go. Where is your destiny? Where is destiny taking you? How would you like to be living your life in the future? And, you might think that is all about just tuning into your creativity, doing what you enjoy. But doing what you enjoy sounds simple, but it may not be simple. There may be things that you enjoy doing that are not particularly useful. And when I say not particularly useful, I mean that in terms of your wider destiny. You can enjoy doing something totally trivial. You can enjoy watching a 1960s science fiction series on YouTube. You can enjoy doing it. There's loads of stuff. You could spend all your every day probably watching science fiction episodes from the 1960s. But is it really fundamental to your destiny? Probably not. And so perhaps this full moon is asking you to be more selective in terms of what you are doing, how you are using your time. Because it doesn't matter how old you are. You may be older or younger than 64, it being my 64th birthday, but whatever it is, time is limited. Even if you're 20 years old, time is limited. You haven't got all the time in the world. And maybe this full moon is actually about using your time properly, however much time you've got left. And you may become acutely aware that you're doing things which are not in accord with your ideal future. We all have ideal futures. We have a future we would like to be, and we need to make that gap. We're in the present. We're trying to move towards the future. We're trying to move towards the best possible future. And there's just stuff in the present which we're doing which is incompatible with this future. And so perhaps we just have to do what we can in the present, strip away the garbage, and really think about how we'd like things to be, and then perhaps we can live our ideal future in the present. That's a bit rather idealistic, isn't it? But maybe this is what the full moon is encouraging us to do, or encouraging you to do. I'm not an Aquarius, so it really could be about just making the most of everything. You have hopes and wishes, and those hopes and wishes are not just random. They're not delusional. They're real. they do say something about how you'd like to lead your life, and it perhaps all starts with a present, and it starts with how you're organizing your time. And maybe listening to me is a waste of time. I mean, I hope not, but it could be a waste of time. And there may be better things that you should be doing, things that are more in accord with your fundamental destiny. Pisces, full moon, and I think it is potentially quite a significant full moon. This full moon is across an important angle in your chart. So we've got the moon in Sagittarius, opposition the sun in Gemini. So this full moon is connected with your sense of direction. It might have a career dimension. Where are you trying to go, and are you going in the right place? And with the moon in Sagittarius, Pisces, I think at the moment you are quite ambitious. There are definitely things you want to do, things you want to get off the ground, and with the full moon, you can maybe start to see why things haven't worked out as well as they could have done. I mean, it doesn't matter how good things are, things could always have been better. And so the full moon might just show you where the drags on your resources have been, how you have been overemphasizing certain things. And also the full moon can just be about the work-home balance. How much effort are you putting into your home and your family and your security, and how much effort are you putting into your ambitions? And with this full moon, you just might be aware of a certain incompatibility. Having things that you really want to do, you really want to achieve, but also having responsibilities, and how exactly do you bring it all together? And you don't want the past to drag you back, and that can always happen. It's always a danger. The past cannot be avoided, and the past can rear its ugly head at the most inopportune times. Okay, the past needn't be ugly, but it can be ugly. And you can find yourself having to deal with things that you should have dealt with, or you thought you should have dealt with years ago, even decades ago. And you're not actually addressing the present and the future. And so, perhaps you need some sort of honesty about the role of the past, and also the importance of security. I mean, this full moon is kind of linked up with Uranus as well, because the moon makes an opposition to Uranus, as well as an opposition to the sun. So, Pisces, it could be that things happen over the course of a weekend, or at least things distract you that seem to sort of knock you off course. And so the more you try to give yourself give yourself stability. I mean, I think, the more you try to give yourself stability, the better. But you're looking for stability. You're not looking for a straitjacket. You're not looking to be sort of nailed to the spot. I mean, that's absolutely what we don't want. You need to have stability, but also flexibility. This full moon is mutable. It's about variety. It's moving from one place to another, and you want to be reasonable about it. What you don't want to do is be in a situation where you have to take dramatic action, or you feel that you might have to take dramatic action. And that might be how some Pisceans feel. You feel that you are a little bit stuck, that there are forces beyond your control that are kind of pushing you in a particular direction, a direction in which you don't want to go, and that you have to take action. It's not about taking gradual action. You have to do something dramatic. You have to you break something almost. I mean, it's not literally, but something needs to be destroyed in order for you to be able to move forward. And it's not very helpful to think about destruction, but it might be the way you think if you don't really address the issue. I mean, when I say address the issue, what issue am I talking about? Just a reminder, I'm talking about, you have an idea about what you want to do, about, where your ambitions lie. Your ambitions are important to you, really important with this full moon. You do not want to be held back. And ideally, you're going to resolve the thing in an organic way. But if you don't resolve it organically, then you just might feel that you have to do something dramatic, sort of break some link. But is it a link you can break? You can never completely break your link with the past, because the past is you. You have your roots in the past, but the roots can't be so strong that they drag you back and put you in a position where you just cannot address the future. So yeah, I know that sounds a bit complicated, but it's just a full moon. I mean, full moons happen. There's a Sagittarius full moon, every year, and I think the broad message of a Sagittarian full moon, if we want to keep it simple, is do be aware of your ambitions. Your ambitions do matter, and if you do things right, I think you really do have a real chance of achieving some of your ambitions, over the next fortnight. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 23, which is splitting apart. So it doesn't sound like a great hexagram. And this hexagram really does indicate that something is breaking. Something has just gone too far. The tensions are forming, and it's just going to get smashed. It's going to just really get sort of unglued and disintegrate. And it's kind of fitting, isn't it, that we've got this hexagram splitting apart at the time to describe a weekend, where we have a full moon. And that is a way of describing a full moon. It really can be. I mean, a full moon can be about splitting apart. You've got the sun and the moon opposite one another. In this case, you've got the sun in Gemini opposition the moon in Sagittarius. The lights are opposite one another. They are arguably incompatible with one another. They represent two principles which cannot be joined. And so what happens? They split apart. And so it could be, in terms of how you're feeling about the weekend, is that you do feel that things are splitting apart, that people might find it difficult to get on with each other, or it might be that you have been involved with something and it's just not working, and it's just falling apart. And that might be the general pattern of a weekend. It's all about looking for differences. It's looking for incompatibilities. We see how things are not making sense, and this disintegration seems to be gathering steam. And we have the fourth line moving and splitting apart, and the image of that is the splitting apart. It talks about furniture here. We're sort of on some couch or a chair, or the couch is splitting apart. Why would it be splitting apart? You almost get the image that you've got termites just eating through the legs, and it's all coming apart. And then the splitting apart is affecting the person sitting on the couch, sitting on the chair, maybe us, if we're not careful. The danger is that the chair collapses and we collapse with it. That's the problem of splitting apart. And so we have to be very careful. And if we're involved in a situation which does seem to be disintegrating, we need to take action, because it's not good. And this process of splitting apart continues, and we have the top line moving. And with the top line moving, everything comes apart, but the splitting apart becomes so intense that it actually impacts the very thing trying to split things apart. The forces of disintegration and evil have kind of exhausted themselves. So in a way, that top line is actually quite good. It suggests that this splitting apart has come to its end. That things aren't splitting apart anymore, and there's maybe just a sense of relief that finally things have gone as far as they can. And so we could feel that relief. It's not going to get any worse. That's a good feeling. Okay, we're watching the rubble, the smashed furniture, whatever, but it's done. This whole disintegrating process is finished, and so we can start to look to the future with a degree of optimism. And then we move to the second hexagram. And, the second hexagram is hexagram 16, which is contentment. And Wilhelm calls this hexagram enthusiasm. And I don't know, moving to contentment after splitting apart, it does indicate complacency. I mean, by the way, contentment is what Greg Winkup calls this hexagram. And I kind of prefer contentment to enthusiasm, because contentment gives us some implication of complacency. We think it's all done. We think it's all finished. We think that the problem is over. And that might be the real problem. To think that it's all done. But it's not all done. This splitting apart is just symbolic, perhaps, of a larger process. And, don't worry, I'm not talking about, you personally. I'm just talking about, perhaps the society in which you're living and your general experiences. And once this process of splitting apart is over, you have to accept that something has happened. Even if the worst is over, accept something has happened. Because the problem about contentment is that one is complacent. One knows that one kind of knows that things aren't perfect. One knows that something really quite serious has happened, but one says, okay, things are fine now. Big sigh of relief. Let's just get on with life and not worry too much about the future. But we need to be prepared. We've perhaps seen a sign of how things are going to be in the future. And rather than just breathe that sigh of relief, we can start to prepare. And that is probably the best way of using the previous hexagram of splitting apart. And it also links with the full moon as well. So things are changing. There is disagreement. There is a sense of fundamental incompatibility. Certain things are being split apart, and we need to always be aware of it, and we need to prepare ourselves so that when things do happen, we're fine, because we are properly protected. So there is a positive message here. But it is about awareness and hard work and not relaxing for too long. Just because you think you're over something doesn't mean you are over it, and there's still work to be done to make sure that you are properly protected. And that's all I've got to say in this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.